The Zephyrian research station hung in the void like a metal spider, its 8 spindly arms reaching out into the darkness of space. Commander Vextar watched through the observation deck as another transport shuttle approached, carrying what he hoped would be the solution to their most dangerous problem. The creature in Containment Bay 7 had already killed 3 guards and injured 5 others. Nothing in the Galactic database could explain its behavior or predict its next move. The Chronari had sent their best behavioral analysts. The Theshan Empire had provided their most advanced containment systems. Even the mysterious Void Walkers had offered their expertise. Nothing worked. The creature simply watched, waited, and when someone made the slightest mistake, it struck with precision that defied explanation. "Sir, the human has arrived," announced Lieutenant Kexare, her antenna twitching nervously. The young Zephyrian had been part of the original discovery team that found the creature on the dead world of Mortis Prime. Vextar turned from the viewport, his 4 arms adjusting his uniform. "Show them to Briefing Room 3. And Kexare, make sure security knows to keep their weapons powered down. Humans are unpredictable when they feel threatened." The human was smaller than expected. Where most species in the Galactic Federation stood at least 8 feet tall, this one barely reached 6. No natural armor plating, no visible weapons, no enhanced sensory organs. Just pale skin, strange fur on top of its head, and 2 small eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "You must be Commander Vextar," the human said, extending one of its limbs in what the database indicated was a greeting gesture. "I'm Marcus Chun, xenobiological specialist, though my friends just call me Chun." Vextar carefully touched the human's appendage, surprised by its warmth and the firmness of its grip. "Welcome aboard, Specialist Chun. I must admit, your species' reputation precedes you." Chun laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both musical and unsettling. "All bad things, I hope. We humans do love our reputation for being completely insane." The briefing room fell silent. Vextar's secondary hearts skipped a beat. Had the human just admitted to mental instability? The files had mentioned human psychological patterns were difficult to understand, but this seemed concerning. "Perhaps we should begin with the situation report," Vextar said carefully. The holographic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional representation of the creature. It stood roughly 12 feet tall, with a serpentine body covered in what appeared to be living shadow. 6 arms ended in claws that could cut through standard hull plating. Its head was elongated, with no visible eyes, yet it somehow tracked movement with perfect accuracy. "We discovered it in the ruins of an ancient city on Mortis Prime," Lieutenant Kexare began. "The entire planet had been sterilized by some unknown force over 10,000 years ago. This was the only living thing we found." Chin studied the hologram intently, walking around it as if examining a sculpture. "Fascinating. What happened when you first encountered it?" "It was docile at first," Vexare continued. "Almost friendly. It allowed our scientists to scan it, take samples, even seemed to enjoy interaction. That changed when we brought it aboard the station." "How so?" "It killed Dr. Thexlon within 6 hours of arriving. Tore him apart in his own laboratory while the security feed showed him simply conducting routine observations. The creature had been completely motionless one moment, then had crossed 15 feet and killed him before our sensors even detected movement." Shin nodded thoughtfully. "And since then, it sits in the center of its containment cell and watches. When anyone enters, it tracks their movement but doesn't react until they make what appears to be an aggressive gesture or get too close. Then it kills them. Always. Define too close." Vextar manipulated the controls, and the hologram shifted to show the containment bay. The creature sat motionless in the center, surrounded by various sensor arrays and feeding mechanisms. Approximately 4.7 meters. Anyone who crosses that boundary dies. And aggressive gestures, pointing scanning devices directly at it. Rapid movements. Loud sounds. Dr. Velash was killed because she sneezed. Chin was quiet for a long moment, still circling the hologram. Have you tried communicating with it? Every known form of communication in the galactic database. Mathematical sequences, musical patterns, light displays, pheromone releases, even telepathic contact. No response. But it responds to perceived threats. Yes, but we can't predict what it considers threatening. Guard Captain Zorketh was killed while standing perfectly still. He had been motionless for over an hour when it suddenly moved. Shin stopped walking and looked directly at Vextar. "I'd like to see it." The journey to Containment Bay 7 took them through the heart of the research station. Shin seemed fascinated by everything, asking questions about the artificial gravity generators, the atmosphere processors, even the food synthesizers. His curiosity appeared genuine, but there was something else in his manner that Vextar couldn't identify. "Tell me about your previous experience with dangerous creatures," Vextar said as they walked. "Define dangerous," Chin replied with that unsettling laugh again. "I've worked with Terran great whites, Venusian crystal spiders, even spent 3 months studying the thought parasites of Alpha Centauri. But honestly, the most dangerous creature I ever encountered was my ex-wife during tax season." Again, the conversation stopped. Vextar's translator was having difficulty processing the human's words. Was your former mate literally dangerous? Or is this another example of human humor? Both, actually. She once threw a coffee mug at my head hard enough to crack the wall behind me. Humans don't really do safe relationships. They arrived at the observation deck overlooking Containment Bay 7. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum, they could see the creature exactly as described. It sat motionless in the center of the room, surrounded by monitoring equipment and automated feeding systems. Chin studied it for several minutes in complete silence. The creature didn't react to their presence, though several of the research team had mentioned it seemed to know when it was being observed. "Beautiful," Chun said finally. Vextar's antenna flattened against his skull in confusion. "I beg your pardon? It's beautiful. Look at those lines, the way it moves even while sitting still. There's intelligence there, but also something else. Purpose, maybe? It's not just waiting randomly. It's waiting for something specific. What could it possibly be waiting for?" Chun turned away from the observation window and looked directly at Vextar. Permission? Permission for what? To go home. The human certainty was unsettling. "Specialist Chun, we found this creature on a dead world. There is no home for it to return to." "Commander, with respect, you found it in the ruins of a city. Ancient ruins. This isn't some wild animal you stumbled across in the wilderness. This is a guardian. A guardian of what? Of whatever wiped out that planet." The implications of Chin's words hit Vextar like a physical blow. "You're suggesting this creature is responsible for the sterilization of Mortis Prime?" "I'm suggesting this creature is what's left after the sterilization of Mortis Prime. The last survivor, maybe, or of the final defense system. Either way, you've essentially kidnapped the sole survivor of a genocide and stuck it in a box. But it killed our people, because they were trying to study it like a laboratory specimen instead of treating it like a sentient being. Look at its behavior patterns again, Commander. It doesn't kill randomly. It kills when it feels threatened or when its boundaries are violated. That's not animal behavior. That's the behavior of someone who has been traumatized beyond imagination and is trying to protect itself." Vextar looked back at the creature, trying to see it through the human's eyes. "If you're correct, then what do you propose we do?" "Simple," Chun said, moving toward the airlock controls. "We ask it nicely what it wants." "Absolutely not." Vextar moved to block the human's path. "That creature has killed 6 people. I will not allow you to commit suicide on my station." Chun paused, and for the first time since arriving, his expression became completely serious. "Commander, I appreciate your concern. I really do. But here's the thing about humans. We're very good at surviving things that should kill us. And we're even better at talking to things that want to kill us. The containment protocols exist for a reason, Specialist Chun. The containment protocols exist because you're approaching this from a position of fear instead of understanding. Look, I get it. Unknown creature, dead crew members, obvious danger. But you called me here because you need a different perspective, right? Well, here it is. That thing isn't a monster. It's a refugee. Vextar considered this. The human had a point about needing a different perspective, and the traditional approaches had clearly failed. But allowing him to enter the containment bay seemed like assisted suicide. What exactly are you proposing to do? Vextar asked. Talk to it. No weapons, no scanning equipment, no sudden movements. Just conversation. You said yourself that previous communication attempts failed. Previous communication attempts were conducted by people who saw it as a test subject. I want to approach it as an equal. There's a difference. Lieutenant Kexare, who had been silent during this exchange, spoke up. Sir, what if he's right? We've exhausted every other option. Vextar looked between the human and his lieutenant, then back at the creature in the containment bay. The thing sat motionless as always, but now he found himself wondering if that stillness was patience rather than predatory waiting. You understand that if you're wrong, you will die, Vextar said finally. Chun smiled, and this time the expression seemed genuinely warm rather than unsettling. Commander, I once convinced the Andromedan war beast to stop eating colonists by offering to share my lunch with it. Trust me when I say that communication is about attitude, not technology. And if communication fails, then at least you'll know you tried diplomacy before resorting to more extreme measures. Vextar spent several long minutes considering the request. The human's reasoning made sense, even if his confidence seemed misplaced. And they genuinely had exhausted every other option short of destroying the creature entirely. Very well, he said finally, but we maintain full security protocols. At the first sign of aggressive behavior from the creature, we extract you immediately. Fair enough, Chin said. Though I should mention that rapid extraction attempts might be exactly the wrong thing to do if it feels threatened. Meaning that if this goes wrong, your best bet might be to leave me in there until I either work it out or become creature food. Pulling me out suddenly could escalate the situation. The casual way the human discussed his own potential death was deeply unsettling to Vextar. Either humans were significantly braver than their files indicated, or they were significantly more insane. I need a few minutes to prepare, Chin said, and I'll need you to clear everyone except essential personnel from this section of the station. Why? Because if I'm right about this being a traumatized survivor, then having a bunch of armed guards visible is going to send exactly the wrong message. As the human walked away to prepare for his encounter with the creature, Vextar found himself questioning everything about the situation. Were they dealing with a dangerous predator, a traumatized survivor, or something else entirely? And why did he find himself trusting a species known throughout the galaxy for their unpredictable and often suicidal behavior? He looked back through the observation window at the motionless creature. For just a moment, he could have sworn it turned its head slightly in his direction, though it had no visible eyes. Then it returned to its previous position, waiting with the infinite patience of something that had already lost everything. Perhaps the human was right. Perhaps they had been asking the wrong questions from the beginning. Instead of trying to understand what the creature was, maybe they needed to understand who it had been. The next few hours would determine whether Marcus Chun was brilliant, insane, or both. Given what Vextar had learned about humans so far, all three possibilities seemed equally likely. But as he watched the human make his final preparations, Vextar found himself hoping that this time, communication would succeed where force had failed. Because if it didn't, he would have to explain to Galactic Command how he had allowed a human to commit suicide by alien creature on his watch. And somehow, he suspected that conversation would be almost as dangerous as the one Chun was about to attempt. Marcus Chun stood outside the containment bay airlock, wearing nothing but standard station coveralls and what appeared to be complete confidence. He had refused all protective equipment, scanning devices, and emergency beacons. The only thing he carried was a small metal container that he claimed held conversation starter. Commander Vextar watched from the observation deck with a mixture of fascination and horror. The human had spent the last hour explaining his approach to the senior staff, and his reasoning was either brilliant or completely insane. "Remember," Chan said into the communication system, "no sudden movements from anyone up there. If this thing is as traumatized as I think it is, any rapid motion in its peripheral vision could trigger a defensive response." Specialist Chun, Lieutenant Kexare, interjected, "The creature has no visible eyes. How could it have peripheral vision? It's been tracking movement perfectly for weeks without visible sensory organs. That suggests either advanced echolocation, electromagnetic sensitivity, or senses we don't understand. Either way, it knows we're here." Chin cycled through the airlock without another word. The inner door hissed open, and he stepped into the containment bay where 6 people had already died. The creature didn't move. Chin stood just inside the doorway for several minutes, making no attempt to approach. He simply observed, turning his head slowly to take in the entire room. The automated monitoring systems tracked his vital signs: elevated heart rate, but steady, breathing controlled, no signs of panic. "Interesting setup you've got here," Chin said finally, his voice carrying clearly through the communication system. He wasn't speaking to the observation deck. He was talking to the creature. Still no response. Chin took a single step forward, then stopped. "I know you can understand me. Maybe not the word specifically, but the intent. Humans are pretty good at reading body language, and you've been demonstrating some very clear communication. Stay away, don't point things at me, don't make sudden moves." Message received. He took another step, still well outside the established kill radius. "My name is Marcus Chun. I'm here because my colleagues upstairs think you're dangerous. They're not wrong, of course. You could probably kill me before I could blink. But here's the thing. So could a lot of creatures I've worked with, and most of them ended up being decent conversationalists once we got past the initial will you eat me phase." Vextar leaned forward against the observation window. The human's casual tone was completely at odds with the situation. He was talking to a lethal alien entity the same way he might chat with a neighbor. "The thing is," Chin continued, "I don't think you want to kill anyone. I think you're scared, angry, and probably grieving. They took you from the only home you've ever known, stuck you in a metal box, and started prodding you with instruments. That would make anyone defensive." For the first time, the creature's head moved slightly. Not enough to be called a reaction, but enough to suggest it was listening. Chin noticed immediately. "There we go. I knew you were paying attention. Look, I'm going to sit down now, okay? Not because I'm tired, but because sitting makes me smaller and less threatening. Basic primate behavior. We sit when we want to show we're not going to attack." He lowered himself to the floor, cross-legged, still maintaining his distance from the creature. The position looked uncomfortable on the metal decking, but Chin seemed perfectly at ease. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said. "They found you on Mortis Prime, in the ruins of what used to be a city. Ancient ruins, from what I hear. That suggests your people had civilization, culture, probably art, and music, and all the things that make life worth living." The creature's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Its head tilted at a slight angle, and the shadowy covering over its body seemed to ripple. "And then something happened," Chun continued. "Something terrible enough to sterilize an entire planet. I'm guessing your people knew it was coming, because they left you behind, not as punishment, but as hope. You're not just a survivor, are you? You're a keeper, a guardian of memory." Vextar's secondary hearts began beating faster. The human was making assumptions that went far beyond available data, but the creature's reaction suggested he might be correct. "That's why you've been so careful about who you let get close," Chin said. "It's not random violence. You're protecting something. Maybe information, maybe artifacts, maybe just the memory of your people. But when someone approaches with scanners and specimen containers, you see desecration, violation." The creature slowly turned its head toward Chun. Despite having no visible eyes, there was no doubt it was looking directly at him. "I want to show you something," Chun said, reaching slowly for the metal container he had brought. "No sudden movements, just like you showed me. This is what humans call mutual respect. He opened the container and removed what appeared to be a small, intricately carved figurine. Even from the observation deck, Vextar could see it was old and obviously precious. "This belonged to my grandmother," Chun said, holding the figurine where the creature could see it. "She died when I was 12 years old, and this is all I have left of her. It's not valuable to anyone else, but to me it represents everything she was. Her stories, her wisdom, her love." He placed the figurine on the floor between himself and the creature. "I understand what it means to be the keeper of someone's memory, and I understand why you'd kill to protect it." The silence stretched for several minutes. The creature remained motionless, but its attention was clearly focused on both Chun and the small figurine. "They want to study you," Chun said eventually. "They want to understand what you are, how you work, where you came from. It's not malicious. They're scientists, and curiosity is what drives them. But they don't understand that you're not just a biological specimen. You're a person." Very slowly, the creature began to move. It unfolded from its sitting position with fluid grace, rising to its full 12-foot height. The shadowy covering that served as its skin rippled like water, and its 6 arms moved in a complex pattern that might have been sign language. Chun watched intently, showing no fear despite the fact that he was now clearly within the creature's kill radius. "I wish I could understand your language," he said, "but I think I get the general message. You want to know if I'm here to help or to harm." The creature took a step forward, then another. It was now less than 6 feet from Chun, close enough to kill him instantly if it chose to do so. Instead, it sat down. The action was so unexpected that Lieutenant Kexare actually gasped audibly. The creature had never before allowed anyone to approach, much less positioned itself non-aggressively near a potential threat. "Well," Chun said with obvious relief, "that's encouraging. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me get close. I know that wasn't easy." He reached slowly for his figurine and picked it up. "You know, I think you and I have more in common than my colleagues realize. We're both very far from home. We're both carrying the weight of memory. And we're both surrounded by people who don't quite understand us." The creature's head tilted again, and one of its arms reached out slowly. Chun held perfectly still as a claw that could have easily torn him apart gently touched the figurine in his hands. "It's ceramic," Chun said softly. "Earth clay, fired in an ancient kiln technique that's been passed down through my family for generations." She made it herself, shaped every curve by hand. The creature withdrew its arm and made a soft sound that the communication system barely picked up. It was musical, haunting, and unmistakably mournful. "You had artists too," Chun said with sudden understanding. "Your people created beautiful things, and you remember them." The creature's entire body shimmered, and the shadowy covering began to change. What had appeared to be living darkness revealed itself to be something far more complex, a bioluminescent display that created shifting patterns of light and color across its skin. "My God," Vextar whispered from the observation deck. "It's trying to show us something." The patterns of light were intricate, beautiful, and clearly intentional. They flowed across the creature's body like a living painting, depicting shapes and forms that suggested architecture, nature, and abstract concepts that had no equivalent in known languages. "Art," Chun said with wonder. "You're showing me your people's art. This is how you remember them." The light display continued for several minutes, each pattern more complex than the last. The creature was sharing its culture, its history, its very identity with this human who had bothered to treat it as an equal rather than a specimen. Finally, the display faded, and the creature returned to its normal appearance. But its posture remained relaxed, non-threatening. "Thank you," Chin said. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Your people must have been remarkable." The creature made another soft sound, this one less mournful and more questioning. "You want to know why I'm here?" Chin said. "Fair question. Officially, I'm here to figure out how to contain you without anyone else getting killed. Unofficially, I think you deserve better than spending the rest of your life in a metal box. He stood up slowly, and the creature tracked his movement but showed no signs of aggression. Here's what I think happened, Chen said, beginning to pace slowly around the room. The creature turned to follow his movement, but its posture remained relaxed. Your people knew something catastrophic was coming. A plague, a war, maybe a natural disaster. They couldn't stop it, but they could prepare for it. The creature's head tilted in what might have been agreement. They chose you as their keeper. Maybe you volunteered, maybe you were selected, but either way, you were given the responsibility of preserving their culture, their memory, their essence. And you've been doing that job for 10,000 years. Chun stopped pacing and looked directly at the creature. But now you're tired. You've been alone for longer than entire civilizations have existed. You've kept faith with your people, maintained your vigil, protected their memory. But deep down, you're ready to rest. The creature slowly nodded its elongated head. The problem is, Chun continued, you can't rest until you know their memory is safe. You can't trust these scientists because they see you as a curiosity rather than a guardian. They want to study you, but they don't want to understand you. Vextar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. The human was describing exactly what they had been doing since bringing the creature aboard. So here's what I propose, Chin said. Let me help you share your people's story. Not as research data, but as cultural exchange. Let me learn about them the way you want them to be remembered, and I'll make sure that memory is preserved and honored. The creature was silent for a long moment, then began to produce a complex series of sounds, musical, mathematical, and linguistic all at once. I know I can't understand your language yet, Chin said, but I'm willing to learn. Humans are good at languages when we put our minds to it. And more importantly, I promise to listen with respect, not just curiosity. The creature stood and moved closer to Chun. This time, there was no hesitation, no wariness. It reached out with one arm and gently touched the human's shoulder. The contact lasted only a moment, but when the creature withdrew its arm, its entire demeanor had changed. The tension that had defined its posture for weeks was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. I take it that was a yes? Chin asked. The creature produced what could only be described as a laugh, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. From the observation deck, Vextar watched in amazement as the human and the creature began what appeared to be an actual conversation. Neither could understand the other's language, but they were clearly communicating through gesture, tone, and body language. Sir, Lieutenant Kexer said quietly, should we interrupt? Establish formal communication protocols? No, Vextar replied. Let them work. The human has accomplished in 30 minutes what we couldn't manage in weeks. I think we should follow his lead. As he watched Chun and the creature continue their interaction, Vextar began to understand something important about humans. They didn't approach problems the way other species did. Where others saw obstacles to overcome, humans saw individuals to understand. Where others saw data to be collected, humans saw stories to be shared. It was a fundamentally different way of viewing the universe, and despite its apparent inefficiency, it seemed to produce results that traditional methods could not. Lieutenant, Vextar said, contact Galactic Command and inform them that we may have a breakthrough in the situation. But also let them know that our approach is going to be unconventional. How unconventional, sir? We're going to try treating our dangerous alien entity as a person instead of a problem. And you think Command will approve of this approach? Vextar watched as Chun pulled out a small device and began showing the creature images of Earth's artwork and music. The creature responded by creating new light patterns, sharing its own people's aesthetic sense. I think, Vextar said, that results speak louder than protocols. And if this human can turn our most dangerous security risk into a cultural exchange opportunity, then I'm willing to let him try. The conversation between human and creature continued for hours, and with each exchange, both parties seemed to grow more animated and engaged. Whatever Chun had awakened in the Ancient Guardian It was clearly something that had been sleeping for far too long. Perhaps, Vextar thought, the key to understanding alien minds wasn't advanced technology or scientific analysis. Perhaps it was simply the willingness to see them as minds worth understanding. 3 days had passed since Marcus Chin's initial contact with the creature, and the research station had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, a cultural embassy. The containment bay had been converted into a meeting space, complete with artistic displays, musical instruments, and translation equipment. The creature, who had revealed its name to be something that roughly translated to Keeper of the Final Song, had proven to be not just intelligent, but remarkably sophisticated. Its knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and artistic theory surpassed most Federation scholars. Commander Vextar stood in the redesigned space, watching Chun and the Keeper engaged in what appeared to be a philosophical debate about the nature of beauty. The human was sketching geometric patterns while the Keeper responded with bioluminescent displays that created three-dimensional mathematical sculptures in the air. Commander, Lieutenant Kex-RA approached with a concerned expression. We've received communication from Galactic Command. They want a full report on the situation, including detailed scans and biological samples. Vextar's antenna flattened with frustration. What did you tell them? That we've established peaceful contact and are proceeding with cultural exchange protocols. They were skeptical. I imagine they were. What exactly did they say? Kex-RA consulted her datapad. Admiral Thexlor's exact words were, "Stop playing games with the dangerous alien and get us actionable intelligence." He's dispatched a military science vessel to take over the situation. The implications hit Vextar immediately. A military science vessel meant containment protocols, forced extraction procedures, and invasive analysis. Everything that would undo the progress Chen had made. When will they arrive? 18 hours, sir. Vextar looked back at the peaceful scene in the former containment bay. Chun was now attempting to teach the Keeper a human song, while the Keeper responded with harmonic frequencies that seemed to make the air itself sing. Neither was aware of the approaching crisis. Sir, Kex-RA continued, there's something else. The Keeper has been asking Specialist Chun about something called the returning. Our translation systems can't make sense of it, but the creature seems to believe something is coming back. Coming back from where? Unknown. But based on the emotional resonance in its communications, it's something the Keeper has been waiting for. Something important. Before Vextar could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the station. Not the standard alert for mechanical problems or security breaches, but the deep, resonant warning that indicated detection of unknown objects in space. Commander to bridge. Vextar spoke into his communicator. Report. Sir, long-range sensors are detecting multiple objects approaching from the direction of Mortis Prime. Configuration unknown, but they're big, and they're moving fast. Vextar rushed to the nearest viewport, with Kex-RA close behind. In the distance, barely visible against the star field, shapes were emerging from hyperspace. Ships, but unlike any design in the Federation database. How many? Vextar asked. Sensors indicate at least 20 vessels, sir. Largest appears to be roughly 3 times the size of a Federation dreadnought. In the converted containment bay, the Keeper had suddenly gone rigid. Its bioluminescent displays flared to brilliant life, creating patterns more complex and urgent than anything they had seen before. Chun, Vextar called through the communication system. What's happening? The human looked up at the observation deck, his expression mixing excitement with concern. The Keeper says its people are coming home. That's impossible. Mortis Prime was sterilized 10,000 years ago. Not its people, Chun said, moving closer to the communication pickup. Its children, the ones who left to escape the catastrophe. They're finally returning to see if anything survived. The revelation struck Vextar like a physical blow. The Keeper wasn't the lone survivor of a dead civilization. It was the guardian left behind to wait for the return of those who had fled. Commander, the bridge officer's voice crackled through the communicator. The unknown vessels are hailing us. They're requesting They're requesting the return of their keeper. Vextar looked at the alien ships, then at the keeper, then at the human who had somehow managed to be present at the most significant first contact event in galactic history. "Put the transmission on speaker," he said. The voice that emerged from the communication system was hauntingly beautiful, musical, and mathematical at the same time. It spoke in the same language the keeper had been using, but with subtle differences that suggested evolution over time. Chen was listening intently, his head tilted as if trying to parse meaning from unfamiliar sounds. The keeper was responding, its bioluminescent displays creating a light show that filled the entire room. "What are they saying?" Vextar asked. "Near as I can tell," Chen replied, "it's a reunion. The keeper is telling them about the 10,000 years of waiting, and they're telling it about the new worlds they've found and the civilizations they've built. And us. The keeper is explaining that it made contact with aliens who treated it with respect. Apparently, that's significant to them." The conversation between the ships and the keeper continued for several minutes, growing increasingly animated. Finally, the keeper turned toward the observation deck and spoke directly to Chun. "It wants to know if we would be willing to meet with its people formally," Chen translated. "As I think the term translates to honored strangers or possibly respected friends." Vextar felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. This was no longer about containing a dangerous creature or managing a research project. This was first contact with an advanced alien civilization, and the decisions made in the next few minutes would affect the entire galaxy. "Commander," Kexra said urgently, "the military vessel from Galactic Command will arrive in 17 hours. If they find us in the middle of first contact negotiations." She didn't need to finish. Military first contact protocols were designed around the assumption that unknown aliens were potential threats. The careful cultural exchange Chun had established would be replaced by security screenings, threat assessments, and containment procedures. "Chun," Vextar said through the communicator, "ask the keeper if its people would be willing to meet with representatives of our government. Formal diplomatic contact." Chun translated the question, and the keeper's response was immediate and complex. The bioluminescent display showed mathematical formulas, star charts, and what appeared to be historical records. "The keeper says its people have been watching our expansion for the last several centuries," Chen reported. "They've been trying to decide whether we're mature enough for contact. Our treatment of the keeper is apparently their test. And our performance?" Chen grinned. "Mixed reviews. Most of our people failed spectacularly, but they're impressed that we were smart enough to bring in someone who approached the situation with empathy instead of force. That was fortunate. Actually, Commander, I don't think it was fortune. The keeper specifically requested a human consultant." Vextar's secondary hearts skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "It had been monitoring our communications since arriving on the station. When it realized we were planning to bring in outside expertise, it influenced the selection process." "Ow!" Chen's expression became slightly embarrassed. "Apparently, it can generate low-level electromagnetic fields that interfere with computer systems. It caused several other consultants' applications to develop mysterious technical errors, while ensuring mine went through cleanly. The implications were staggering. The creature had not only been aware of their plans, but had actively manipulated them to ensure the outcome it wanted. It chose you specifically," Vextar said. "Why?" "Because humans have a reputation for treating dangerous situations as social problems instead of military ones. The Keeper's people wanted to see if we would try to communicate or just try to control." A new voice joined the communication channel, this one speaking accented but clearly understandable galactic standard. "This is Fleet Commander Morthak of the Eternal Song Collective. We greet our Federation friends, and thank you for caring for our Keeper." Vextar activated the station's main communication array. "This is Commander Vextar of Federation Research Station Alpha 7. We are honored by your contact, and grateful for the opportunity to meet. Commander Vextar, our Keeper has spoken highly of your human consultant. We would like to invite him to serve as cultural liaison for formal diplomatic relations between our peoples. Chun looked up at the observation deck with surprise. They want me to be an ambassador. It appears so, Vextar replied. The question is whether you're willing to take on that responsibility. Before Chun could answer, another alarm began sounding. This one indicated the approach of Federation vessels. Sir, came the call from the bridge. Admiral Thexlor's task force just dropped out of hyperspace. 3 heavy cruisers and a science vessel. They're requesting immediate surrender of the alien entity for military analysis. The situation had just become infinitely more complicated. On one side was a peaceful alien civilization offering diplomatic relations. On the other was the Federation military, arriving with orders to secure a potential threat through any means necessary. Fleet Commander Morthak, Vextar said carefully, "We have a complication. Our military forces have arrived with orders that may conflict with diplomatic protocols." The response was immediate and concerning. "Commander, our sensors indicate the approaching vessels have weapons powered and shields raised. This does not suggest peaceful intentions." Through the viewport, Vextar could see the Eternal Song fleet repositioning itself into what was unmistakably a defensive formation. The Federation task force was doing the same. "Chun," Vextar called urgently. "Can the Keeper help us prevent this from escalating into a military incident?" The human was already in deep conversation with the Ancient Guardian, their exchange rapid and intense. Finally, Chun looked up. "The Keeper has a suggestion," he said. "It wants to speak directly to both fleets." "To what end?" "To tell them what it told me 3 days ago. That there's a difference between power and wisdom, and that the measure of a civilization isn't how much force it can bring to bear, but how carefully it chooses when to use that force." Admiral Thexlor's voice crackled through the communication system with typical military authority. "Research Station Alpha 7. This is Admiral Thexlor commanding Federation Task Force Gamma. You will immediately transfer the alien entity to our custody for proper security analysis." Fleet Commander Morthak's response was equally firm, but notably calmer. "Admiral Thexlor, the being you call an entity, is our keeper, a guardian of our culture and history. We will not permit its mistreatment." The stage was set for a confrontation that could either establish humanity as a species capable of peaceful first contact or trigger the first interstellar war the galaxy had seen in centuries. Vextar looked at Chun, who was still conferring quietly with the Keeper. The human had managed to turn a security crisis into a diplomatic opportunity through nothing more than empathy and patience. Now the question was whether those same qualities could prevent a shooting war between 2 technologically advanced civilizations. "Commander," Chun called up to the observation deck, "the Keeper has a proposal for both fleets. But it wants your permission to proceed." "What kind of proposal?" Chun smiled, and once again Vextar was struck by how the human's confidence seemed completely divorced from the severity of the situation. "It wants to give them a history lesson," Chun said, "about what happens to civilizations that choose war over wisdom." As Vextar considered the request, he realized that the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of first contact, but the future relationship between 3 civilizations. And somehow, that future rested in the hands of a human who approached the universe as if everything was just another conversation waiting to happen. "Proceed," Vextar said, hoping that human optimism was as infectious as human recklessness seemed to be. The Keeper stood in the center of the converted containment bay, its bioluminescent displays creating patterns more complex than anything previously witnessed. But this time, the light show wasn't confined to its body. Somehow, it was projecting the patterns throughout the station's communication systems, sharing them simultaneously with both the Federation Task Force and the Eternal Song Fleet. Marcus Chun stood beside the Ancient Guardian, serving as interpreter for what was becoming the most significant historical presentation in galactic history. The Keeper is showing them the last days of Mortis Prime. Chun translated as the light patterns shifted to show images of a beautiful world filled with towering crystal cities and floating gardens. This was their homeworld before the catastrophe. Admiral Thexlor's voice came through the communication system with barely concealed impatience. Research Station Alpha 7, we don't have time for alien picture shows. Transfer the creature to our custody immediately. Fleet Commander Morthak's response was notably cooler. Admiral, you would do well to observe what our keeper is sharing. This is not entertainment. This is education. The display shifted, showing the approach of something from deep space. It wasn't a ship or a natural phenomenon, but something that defied easy classification. As it drew closer to Mortis Prime, the planet's biosphere began to fail. A plague, Chun translated, his voice growing somber. But not biological. Something that consumed the fundamental forces that held their reality together. Their scientists called it the unmaking. The images showed massive evacuation efforts as the planet's population fled to prepared ships. But not everyone could be saved. As the evacuation proceeded, volunteers remained behind to fight the advancing plague with increasingly desperate measures. They tried everything, Chen continued. Temporal barriers, dimensional shields, even attempting to collapse local space-time to contain it. Nothing worked. The unmaking consumed everything it touched, leaving only void. The final images were heartbreaking. A handful of survivors, including the Keeper, standing in the last functioning city as reality itself began to dissolve around them. The Keeper volunteered to stay behind. Chen's voice was barely above a whisper. Not because it could stop the plague, but because someone needed to witness. Someone needed to remember. And someone needed to be here when their people finally found a way to return. Admiral Thexlor's next transmission lacked its previous authority. What happened to the plague? How did they survive? The Keeper's display showed the planet's surface becoming a wasteland, but also revealed something else. Deep beneath the surface, the ancient Guardian had discovered that the unmaking could be slowed, even stopped, by conscious observation. By watching, by remembering, by maintaining awareness of what had been lost, reality could be anchored against the dissolution. The Keeper spent 10,000 years holding pieces of its world together through pure will and memory, Chun translated. Every story, every song, every work of art its people had ever created. It kept them all alive in its mind, creating a bubble of preserved reality in an ocean of nothing. Commander Vextar watched the displays with growing understanding. That's why it killed people who approached with scanners and instruments. It wasn't protecting itself. It was protecting the last fragments of an entire civilization. Exactly, Chen confirmed. And why it reacted so strongly to being removed from Mortis Prime. Every meter of distance from the planet weakened its ability to maintain the preservation field. The revelation changed everything. What the Federation had seen as a dangerous alien entity was actually a living memorial, a conscious museum containing the cultural heritage of an entire species. Fleet Commander Morthak's voice carried new emotion when he spoke again. Admiral Thexlor, you now understand what our Keeper sacrificed. For 10 millennia, it maintained our world's memory while we searched the galaxy for a solution to the unmaking. And did you find one? Admiral Thexlor asked. Yes, but not in the way we expected. We discovered that conscious minds, when properly networked and focused, could not only resist the unmaking, but actively reverse it. What destroyed our world was not unstoppable. It was simply too vast for any single world to fight. The Keeper's displays shifted again, showing star maps and mathematical formulas that describe reality manipulation on a galactic scale. Our people have spent the last 10,000 years building a network of conscious observers across dozens of worlds. Morthak continued. Artists, philosophers, historians, scientists, anyone whose work involves deep understanding and preservation of knowledge. Together, we've learned to heal the wounds the unmaking left in space-time. Chun looked up at the observation deck where Commander Vextar stood. They're saying that consciousness itself is a force of creation. The more minds that actively observe and remember something, the more real it becomes. And they want to share this knowledge with the Federation? Vextar asked. More than that, Chen replied. They want to invite us to join their network. They believe human consciousness is particularly well suited for reality preservation. Admiral Thexlor's voice carried a new tone of respect. What would such cooperation involve? Fleet Commander Morthak answered directly. Cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. We would teach you the techniques of conscious observation, and you would share your species' unique perspective on existence. Humans, we have observed, have an unusual talent for finding beauty and meaning in unexpected places. Chun grinned at the compliment, then translated the Keeper's next communication. The Keeper wants to know if Admiral Thexlor would be willing to experience a direct demonstration of reality preservation. What kind of demonstration? It wants to show you Mortis Prime as it was before the unmaking. Not just images, but a full sensory experience of the world it's been keeping alive in memory. There was a long silence before the Admiral responded. Is it safe? As safe as dreaming, Chen assured him. The Keeper has been sharing these experiences with me for the past 3 days. It's like being inside a living memory. Admiral Thexlor's next words surprised everyone. Very well, I accept. The process took several minutes to arrange. The Admiral had to transport to the research station, where the Keeper could establish direct neurological contact. When he finally stood in the converted containment bay, facing the ancient guardian he had come to capture, the change in his demeanor was remarkable. The Keeper approached the Admiral slowly, its movements graceful and non-threatening. When it reached out with one of its 6 arms, Thexlor did not flinch. The contact lasted only moments, but when it ended, the Admiral staggered backward with tears in his eyes. By the void, he whispered. It was beautiful. The music, the art, the way their thoughts themselves seemed to dance through the air. How could anything so magnificent be destroyed? It wasn't destroyed, Chen said gently. It was preserved, and now it can be restored bigger and better than before with the help of allies who understand its value. Admiral Thexlor looked around the room, his gaze taking in the displays, the equipment, and, most importantly, the peaceful scene of human and alien working together in mutual respect. Commander Vextar, he said finally, I'm modifying my orders. This situation requires diplomatic protocols, not military ones. Sir, contact Galactic Command and inform them that we've encountered not a hostile entity, but a potential ally of unprecedented value. Request permission to begin formal first contact negotiations. Fleet Commander Morthak's approval was audible in his voice. Admiral, your openness to new perspectives speaks well of your people. We believe this partnership will benefit both our civilizations. The Keeper produced a sound that Chun had learned to recognize as laughter, then began a new display pattern that filled the room with warmth and light. The Keeper says this is exactly what it hoped would happen, Chun translated. When it shows me his first contact, it wasn't just testing whether humans could be peaceful. It was testing whether we could help bridge the gap between different ways of thinking. Commander Vextar descended from the observation deck to join the group. Specialist Chun, it appears you've managed to turn a containment crisis into the most successful first contact in Federation history. Actually, sir, Chun replied with characteristic humility, I just listened. The Keeper did all the hard work. Admiral Thexlor studied the human with new interest. Specialist Chun, I understand the Eternal Song Collective has requested you serve as cultural liaison. Are you prepared to accept that responsibility? Chun looked at the Keeper, who responded with an encouraging display of lights. I'd be honored, Admiral. Though I should warn you, my diplomatic experience consists mainly of convincing angry aliens not to eat me. Given your success rate so far, Admiral Thexlor said with what might have been a smile, I think that's exactly the kind of experience we need. Over the following hours, the framework for an unprecedented alliance began to take shape. The Eternal Song Collective would share their knowledge of reality preservation and consciousness networking. The Federation would provide resources and perspectives for expanding the network to include dozens of member species. The Keeper would return to Mortis Prime, but not alone. Human observers would accompany it, learning the techniques of memory preservation while helping to expand the restored areas of the planet. Federation scientists would work alongside Eternal Song philosophers to develop new approaches to protecting reality from future unmakings. There's something else, Chun said as the negotiations continued. The Keeper has been monitoring our communications since it arrived. It's been watching how different species interact with each other, how we resolve conflicts, how we share knowledge. And Commander Vextar prompted. And it thinks we're ready for something bigger. The unmaking wasn't unique to Mortis Prime. There are other worlds, other civilizations that have been damaged by similar phenomena. The Keeper's people want to help us heal them. Admiral Thexlor leaned forward with interest. How many worlds are we talking about? Chun consulted with the Keeper, then looked back with an expression that mixed awe with responsibility. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Entire sectors of space that have been written off as dead zones or forbidden territories. But they're not dead. They're just wounded, waiting for enough conscious minds to remember them back to life. The implications were staggering. What they were discussing wasn't just first contact or diplomatic alliance. It was a galaxy-wide restoration project that would require cooperation between dozens of species and centuries of dedicated work. The question is, Admiral Thexlor said thoughtfully, are we mature enough as a civilization to take on that kind of responsibility? The Keeper's response was immediate and clear. Its bioluminescent displays showed images of the Federation's greatest achievements, peaceful resolutions of conflicts, successful cooperation between different species, the establishment of trade networks that benefited everyone involved. The Keeper says we've already proven we are, Chun translated. The fact that we brought it here peacefully, that we listened instead of forcing our will, that we're having this conversation instead of shooting war, that's all the proof needed. As the day continued and the formal agreements took shape, one thing became clear. The encounter that had begun as a containment crisis had evolved into something that would reshape galactic civilization. The Keeper would no longer be alone in its vigil. Humans, with their talent for finding meaning in unexpected places, would help maintain the memories that kept reality stable. The Eternal Song Collective would share knowledge that could heal wounds in space-time itself. And the Federation would provide the framework for expanding this cooperation across the galaxy. You know, Chun said as he watched the various representatives working together, when I accepted this assignment, I thought I was just going to have a conversation with a dangerous alien. And instead, Commander Vextar asked. Chun smiled as he observed the Keeper teaching Federation officers the basic principles of reality preservation through conscious observation. Instead, I got to help prevent a war and start a golden age. Not bad for a day's work. The Keeper's response to this was the most complex light display yet seen, a pattern that somehow managed to convey gratitude, hope, and infinite possibility all at once. In the end, it wasn't advanced technology or military force that had made the difference. It was simply one human who approached an alien entity with the assumption that it had something valuable to say and the patience to listen until he understood what that something was. The galaxy would be a very different place because Marcus Chun had chosen to sit down, share a personal memory, and treat a traumatized survivor as an equal rather than a specimen. And as the Keeper often observed in its communications with a growing network of conscious observers, sometimes the most profound changes began with the smallest gestures of respect and understanding. The universe, it turned out, was much more willing to reveal its secrets to those who asked politely than to those who demanded answers.